That Chad there is Mark Shaultz. What he just hit was a kimura trap counter to the high crotch. After completely eviscerating his opponent's shoulder, Mark would be disqualified and would not be allowed to continue in the Olympic Games that year. Kimura traps are a common move hit in BJJ and are often used to sweep the opponent or come up on the back on top. They're also used nowadays to counter the single leg attacks on the feet. However, kimura traps are illegal in wrestling if you do what Mark Shaultz does and just completely shatter your opponent's. However, there is a way to do it legally in wrestling and not shatter your opponent's shoulder and not cause the ref to call potentially dangerous. And we'll see that later on with Mark's brother, Dave. Now, before we get any further, I do not want to say wrestlers invented the kimura. No siree. It was by this gentleman. His name was Kimura. Forget his first name, but yeah, he challenged Helio Gracie to a challenge. He was a judo fella, and he hit these kimura, what they called it, the double wrist lock, on Helio Gracie. And Helio Gracie was like, wow, what a Chad, what a move. Stealing it, and I'm calling it the kimura. Typically, the kimura is typically hit from a dominant position, such as north, south, or side control, or even on bottom in a fully closed guard. But typically, you don't see it hit off of a wrestling exchange until modern BJJ. And I want to say that modern BJJ actually got this technique from the Shaultz brothers, who hit it early on in the 1980s, okay? In the Olympic Games, you see at the clip in the beginning, Mark hits it and absolutely just horsecocks this man's shoulder and eviscerates it. But he hits it from a high crotch. And in MMA and in Jiu Jitsu, you got to be careful hitting it from a high crotch position, especially in MMA when your butt's against the cage, because you cannot sit back on it and get your opponent's weight forward. And if they have a fully locked high crotch, you can't sit back on it. It leaves you pretty easy to get picked up, horsecocked, and slammed on your head like poor Rose Namajunas here, who is just now remembering Pat Barry's name, her fiance. A much better option to hit this, especially if you're wrestling and kimuras are not legal, is to hit it off the single leg. It's much better in the single leg position, but you could trap the opponent's head and crunch their posture down by bringing your chest over their head and then going for that double wrist tie or the kimura grip. And that allows you to better control their posture and not just allow them to horsecock you, pick you up, and dump you, okay? And as you can see here, Dave was thoroughly known for this. He hits it several times in his competition career. He even uses it here to go into a little judo throw, trips his opponent, hits a beautiful throw. And I tell you what, the opponent's shoulder may look a little bit safer, but oh my gosh, I would not want to be the guy in on a single leg there. It looks like his freaking shoulder is out of socket and is going to need a freaking surgery for that labrum tear. Holy freaking buckets, that guy was freaking nasty with this move. Yeah, so if you are a wrestler and are trying to hit this counter in a wrestling match, I'd be careful horsing that arm over, especially on a high crotch. I maybe stick away from doing it on a high crotch because that is a great way to rip the shoulder out of socket and get disqualified. You could be a little bit more cheekier with the single leg approach and get your leg back. It looks much safer and not as potentially dangerous, unless you're Dave Shaultz and you're just freaking going to rip that thing and look at the ref and say, hey, do something about it. But yeah, the single leg kimura trap counter, I would say, is much better fit for wrestling, and you won't get called on it as much, and if anything, it'll be more of a potentially dangerous call, not a disqualification. Because on the high crotch, if the opponent, especially if the opponent doesn't know it's coming and just unlocks their hands, I mean, you could just absolutely rip their shoulder. In a day of social media, that is getting posted on Instagram, and you will receive a lot of friggin' hate comments. So yeah, as far as a counter to the single leg, I would just stick a counter to the shot. Stick away from doing it on a high crotch and stay with the single leg if you're a wrestler. The next way you could use the kimura lock in wrestling, I feel like, is much more lesser known than when you counter the single leg or high crotch. I feel like a lot of people nowadays know that counter due to Jiu Jitsu, due to like UFC and MMA. They've seen it before. They know what it looks like. And I mean, Mark and Dave hit it back in the day. But this one, I think, would be a huge advantage for your top wrestling, okay? There's this thing called the hammerlock or the bar arm, whatever you may call it. bunch of different moves. Bunch of different names for moves in wrestling. So, whatever somebody calls it, it's where you get the arm on the back and keep it at 90 degrees. Because if you keep it above 90 degrees or above the waistline, then the ref will stop it because it's potentially dangerous. So, yeah. So a lot of guys struggle getting this arm out from under their opponent because they'll sit their weight on it and they can't get it out. And so you could use this double wrist lock or kimura lock to rip that arm out and have an easier, mechanically stronger way to break the arm out from underneath them, and so they can't just like sit on it and stall. And a wrestler who did this, and I don't know if he did this, but his name's Alex Marinelli, the Bull. He used to wrestle for Iowa. He was a freaking beast. And so I always liked watching him work on top and hit this move. It was like his bread and butter on top. Guy would sit on it, and he would get that double wrist lock, come all the way out in front, and kind of like step his knee on the head. And it reminds me very much to like a north-south kimura when the guy's trying to like belly down and put his weight on that. It's almost like the same exact position as what he gets into. And so obviously in BJJ, you're trying to like fully separate the hands or fully separate the arm from the body and get the sub. For wrestling, you just need that space to shoot your hand through to the opposite hip and hit that cow catcher or bulldog or twist them off, whatever you may call it. And this is what Alex Marinelli was known for. And he was absolutely mean with this. He would go out front, put his knee on the head, get enough space to go hand to the hip, and just freaking bulldog and run him over. Here you see me utilize the same position as Marinelli does in a Jiu Jitsu match from the north-south position. My opponent tries to belly out or base down, and you can see this double wrist lock allows me to keep him flat on his back and kind of turn him over. So if you were to stay belly down, it would just rip his arm off and get the kimura finish. And so it's very effective in wrestling if you get this double wrist lock grip to get the arm on the back to turn him. And it's also effective in jiu-jitsu because if you get the arm out, you get the kimura finish like I did in that match there. So yeah, the jiu-jitsu move, the kimura, is actually underutilized, I believe, in wrestling. And it can actually be used in a legal sense and not be used to injure your opponent, but to open up offense from the top position to get your turns going like Alex Marinelli did. And also you can use it as a defensive trap from single legs. Probably not from high crotches as much because that'll cause you to kind of rip your opponent's shoulder in a non-favorable way, and the ref will probably more than likely call it a disqualification, illegal move. Hope you Chads enjoyed this video and can take away some tips and tricks from it, like using the kimura in wrestling in a legal sense, like the Sly Fox Dave Shaultz and his brother Mark Shaultz, and the Bull Alex Marinelli. Be sure to like and subscribe and drop a comment down below. Thank you. See you next time.